At one point, I remember asking my fifth graders, if you could look out the window 100 years ago, what do you think you'd see? And silence, silence, silence. And then one shy kid says, dinosaurs? And it hit me like a thunderbolt, like they just have no sense of the passage of time.
Welcome to the brand new History Matters podcast. I'm your host, Barbara Davidson, President of Standards Work and Executive Director of the Knowledge Matters campaign. This podcast was born out of a vision, one I believe all educators have, of inspiring our students to ask big questions, to develop their love of learning through reading, and to feel empowered to go out and explore their community and the world. We believe great history education can be a spark that causes this to happen. The History Matters podcast will explore how it's done. We decided to launch the podcast because while the national conversation about the science of reading is growing, the role of content knowledge in reading is still woefully understated. We're also concerned that much of the interest in civics education is ignoring the groundwork that must be laid in the elementary grades. I hope this podcast will show you how history serves both literacy and civic goals, and how some groundbreaking work and practicing educators are out there right now getting it done. For this inaugural episode of the History Matters podcast, I talked to Robert Pondiscio, founder of the Knowledge Matters campaign. Robert is a former fifth grade teacher, journalist, and author of the book, How the Other Half Learns. Robert and I talked about the roots of his long-running passion for building students' knowledge of the world and his conviction about the importance of strong history instruction in the elementary grades. I think you'll enjoy this lively discussion. Oh my goodness, Robert, I cannot believe that we are doing this. My guest today is Robert Pondiscio, a friend and partner in crime for at least 15 years, right, Robert?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
If not longer. Yeah, it's been a while.
So let's start off by establishing where did your passion for elementary history instruction begin? Where was it born?
Wow. Well, it's interesting because I've always been, I shouldn't say I've always been, I've been a history buff for much of my life. And interestingly enough, I trace it back to the bicentennial. I'm old enough to have been in eighth grade in 1976 when the bicentennial was a very big deal. I mean, you've got to be our age to remember this. But it was a big commercial enterprise. I grew up on Long Island. Remember the Festival of Tall Ships that happened in my backyard? I remember seeing 1776, which was our generation's Hamilton, on TV and absolutely falling in love with it. And it just happened to be the year in eighth grade that we did American history. So everything lined up, and that kind of made me a lifelong history buff. In terms of my passion for history as a subject, working with students, one of the formative moments in my journey as a teacher was a professional development at my South Bronx elementary school in probably my first year of teaching. And I'll never forget this. The principal led a PD, the title of which was No More Trivial Pursuit. She said, it's not important for kids to learn the War of 1812. Instead, they should grapple with essential questions like, is war ever justified? But this was one of those moments where, like, come on, you gotta be kidding me. How can you expect any educated person to have anything worth saying about is war ever justified if they don't know history, if they don't know the War of 1812, if they don't know, American history? So and it was just like one of those early moments in my teaching career where like, wait a minute, there is less here than meets the eye.
Yeah. Wow. What a compelling story. I just wonder, in terms of sort of setting the stage, Robert, you're in a good position to do this. What's your understanding about what's going on in elementary in particular, instruction across the country?
I started in 2002 when the ed reform movement was kind of at its high watermark in terms of its kind of prestige and moral authority. And policymakers not unwisely decided that, well, look, we really needed to get kids reading and doing math competently, get them, up to speed. So that set in motion a series of well-intended reforms, most notably No Child Left Behind. And that, this idea that we're going to get every single kid in this country reading on grade level in the next decade. Well, who wouldn't want that? Well, the problem is the mischief is how that was interpreted in schools. Okay, we're going to do reading and math, and everything else can wait. It didn't literally. I mean, that wasn't literally the case in every single school, but it might as well have been. It certainly was in my school. Everything was reading, 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 math, 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 and nothing else. And as you know, and I assume some of our listeners know, that's just not how you build a reader. Kids need not just history, they need science, they need art, they need music, they need the full range of experience. I can't finish a paragraph without invoking E.D. Hirsch Jr., who's kind of like my guru in this. But he has pointed out for decades now that the way language proficiency works is readers, or rather writers and speakers, make assumptions about what their listeners and readers know. And when those assumptions are correct, language is fluid and proficient. And when it's not, it falls apart. And that is literally what I saw in my South Bronx classroom every single day. Kids who could decode but struggled with comprehension.
So what are the arguments for shared knowledge?
The argument for shared knowledge is the argument for literacy. It's I can't say it any more plainly than that. I mean, this is what we all learned from E.D. Hirsch Jr. I alluded to it a moment ago that language is more than just or reading is more than just 26 letters and 44 phonemes and whatnot. It's more than decoding the words. It is comprehension. My favorite analogy that I've used over the years is I compare reading to the child's game of Jenga, where every single block is, a bit of background knowledge or a vocabulary word. If you've played that game as a child or with a child, then you know how this works. You pull out a couple of blocks and everything's fine. Then you pull out one too many and the entire thing collapses. That's what it's like to be a reader, with a deficit of background knowledge or vocabulary. And what makes it so vexing to people is those of us who are well-educated and literate simply don't realize or remember that we are like that proverbial fish, that doesn't know what's in water. We are swimming in knowledge and vocabulary. So what seems obvious to us, like, working as a teacher, like, how can you get that test question wrong? The answer is right there in the passage. Well, they've had that Jenga phenomenon. And back to history, it's a sin. It's a crime that we are not, giving kids their rich history through whatever lens you choose to teach it. I will never forget. At one point, I remember asking my fifth graders in the South Bronx, because we were in this 100-year-old schoolhouse on the fifth floor. Said, if you could look out the window 100 years from, and we had a time machine. You were looking out the window 100 years ago. What do you think you'd see? And silence, silence, silence. And then one shy kid says, dinosaurs? It's like 100. And it hit me like a thunderbolt. Like, they just have no sense of the passage of time,
Yeah.
right? How we got from here to there. And that's what goes missing when you don't have a good grounding in history. Like, you're part of a story. You are in a moment of time. There were things that came before you. There were things that are going to come after you. And unless you can place yourself in that stream of time, then there's just something tragic about that, right? About not understanding not just your country's history, your family's history, the world's history, how we got here. And frankly, what a privilege it is to be, here at this moment in time where so much has gone before you to make this moment possible.
Well, I have this instinct that history's best days may be ahead of it, in part because of this wider embrace that the field seems to have about the importance of background knowledge. I mean, let's take a win here, Robert.
No, I choose to agree. Yeah, I think we are having this science of reading moment right now, which I frankly would have never expected. And had you prophesied it to me 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said, well, great, maybe not in my lifetime, but eventually. So sure, it's here, and I do agree with you. I mean, the number of people that I talk to, day to day, week to week, who do understand, that connection between knowledge and vocabulary and reading achievement is, I used to joke we could meet in the washroom of a 727. Now we might occupy the entire 727, including the first class seats. So it's gotten better. But look, I don't want to be, overly credulous or naive. We still have a long way to go. I think in the broad public imagination, there's still this idea that reading is a, quote, skill. that first you learn to read, then you read to learn, and as we know, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
One of the reasons that the Knowledge Matters campaign is putting a finer point on the need for background knowledge through launching this History Matters campaign is really because we feel that history is particularly privileged content. And not only is it a topic area that there's great understanding that we have need for now, in particular in our country, but also because I think mostly because of the way in which history is, what history is, its story. Mm-hmm. And therefore it has more stickiness to it.
Sure. Look, I like to remind people, I make a joke out of this. I say, Horace Mann went to his grave without ever once having uttered the phrase college and career ready. And what I mean by that is like the founding principle, the founding point of American public education was not college and career readiness. It was preparation for citizenship. It was character education. It was history. It's instructive to revisit the mindset of those earliest thinkers about education, the Benjamin Rushes, the Noah Websters, Thomas Jefferson, and others, who were very concerned about this fragile thing called a republic. We all love that story about Benjamin Franklin. What have we got, doctor? A republic, madam, if you can keep it. Well, that wasn't just a wry remark. It was not a certainty that we would keep it. Republics tend to end in things like, bloodshed and guillotines and whatnot. So it was a long shot bet. And it required a well-educated population. If you're going to put the people in charge, they need to be well-educated. They need to be virtuous citizens. So that's why we have these things called public schools. It was not for the kind of the instrumentalist, this is about me, this is about my career, this is about my educational opportunities. This is about how we're going to keep the republic. So those of us who favor, a strong history and civic knowledge or an education rich in those things, we have nothing to apologize for. Okay, this is the founding purpose of American public education.
So, if you could wave your magic wand and do something, what would you do to improve elementary history instruction?
Boy, I'm really glad that you narrowed the question to elementary because that's a lot easier to answer than what goes beyond it. Okay, if you're giving me the magic wand, I want every school to be, if not exactly a core knowledge school, I want them to have based their curriculum on that very, very sound idea that reading is not a standalone skill, that it requires broad knowledge. And look, frankly, let me contradict myself somewhat when saying nobody wants to do this work of establishing what it is that kids should know, in history or civics or geography or whatnot. It's a little bit easier at the elementary level. I have this bet that I would love somebody to take me up on, which is, why don't we want to, say what kids should learn in history or civics or social studies? Because, then we're going to have to argue about evolution. Then we're going to have to argue about abortion. Then we're going to have to argue about all these third rail topics. Well, maybe not in elementary school. So here's my proposition, Barbara. If you were to take in all 50 states, put a panel together, teachers, parents, students, and say, okay, what is it that you think the question that Hirsch asked as the foundation of his work, what should every kindergartner know? What should every first grader know, second grader, et cetera, et cetera? My guess is there would be, I'm not kidding, 95% agreement. Who's going to say, no, I don't think it's important for kids to know their shapes and colors. I don't think it's important for kids to know the oceans and continents. We might disagree on, you might want to put, Roman history or, the ancient Greeks in third grade. I might want to put them in fourth grade. But I would bet you real money that at the elementary school level, what is the history that kids really need to know to have foundational knowledge so they can participate thoughtfully in all of those controversial arguments they're going to have in middle school and high school? I'd wager my last dime that it would be a lot less controversial than people think. So that's my magic wand. I want schools in all 50 states and in all 14,000 districts to do exactly that, to sit down in front of a blank sheet of paper and just say, okay, what is it we expect kids to know to be literate, to be, competent citizens, to be engaged, to be excited about participating, to playing a part in the American experiment. I'd love to see schools take up that challenge.
To learn more about Robert's work, you can visit his Substack, The Next 30 Years, which is linked to in our show notes. This podcast is produced by the Knowledge Matters Campaign. You can learn more about our work at knowledgematterscampaign.org. To catch up on all the History Matters podcast, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.